I want to welcome you all to a very special program. Many of you already know our speaker. You've also should all have a biography of our speaker. But as is obvious, if you just go up on the internet, you can find out almost everything you want to know or hear many of his talks. You can find those on the internet as well. Muhammad Tahir al-Qudri is a very well-known scholar, not only in Pakistan, but throughout the Muslim world, and increasingly in recent years in the West. He's had a very distinguished career studying both law and Islamic studies, was a professor and head of the department at the Punjab University, and is the founder of Minhaj al-Quran. He is a prolific author. We were just talking. He has some 450 books published out of 1,000 that he's finished. And so I'm hoping after this to convince him to put my name on some of those books so we can be co-authors. Since he's already written them, it sounds pretty good to me. In any case. But as many of you know, he, as it were, shot to even more international prominence with a major fatwa that he gave, running to something like 600 pages, addressing some of the key issues that we obviously face today internationally, in particular the issue of extremism and terrorism and its relationship or lack of relationship to Islam. What we propose to do today is to have a talk and then to have a question period. When it's time for questions, if you would go to the microphone and please identify yourself, and then you can ask a question. Questions are preferred to long statements because it's basically his party and not yours. So for those of you who want to say something, let's try to keep it brief so that we can benefit as much as we can from having this distinguished scholar and religious leader with us. Please.
نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Respectable audience, honorable ladies and gentlemen, I feel honored and I am delighted by being with you this afternoon on invitation of a very internationally well-known, highly respected scholar, Professor John Esposito, and I am going to say a few words on different aspects of that fatwa and some other important aspects which are directly related to that particular subject, although those subjects were basically not included in my fatwa book. Another book is coming on those subjects, but I will try to accommodate all relevant issues very, very briefly in this talk. Since I received a letter and whatever was written in that, so I found that I am supposed to address those particular issues regarding the fatwa, regarding the Kharijites ideology and its connection to present-day terrorism, and regarding the concept of jihad, and particularly on the subject of juristic division or juridical division of various countries in Darul Islam and Darul Harb, abode of peace and abode of war, and confusions and misunderstandings which have emerged through this division because of lack of proper knowledge and appreciation of classical sciences. So to start with, I would like to issue a commencing statement, and that is the basis of the edict which I issued this year, condemning any kind of act of terrorism in its absoluteness, without any conditionality, without putting ifs and buts to its illegality. The basis is that Islam declares killing of mankind or killing of a human being indiscriminately, whether a Muslim is being killed or a non-Muslim is being killed, equally gives equal legal weight has been given, and it has been declared equally a sin, a forbidden act. And if this act of killing takes place with a particular idea, with a particular ideology, with a particular theology, that this act of killing is lawful and permissible, or I would be rewarded for that, then this act of killing of mankind becomes an act of kufr, act of disbelief. It is not only to be taken as a forbidden act, which is known as haram, rather it is an act of disbelief known as act of kufr. So by this act of killing, all these terroristic acts and suicide bombings, they take the person committing these kind of acts out of the ambit of Islam. It is declared in Holy Quran, in Surah 5, verse number 32, Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin aw fasadin fil ard faka'annama qatala an-nasa jami'a. Whoever kills a person unjustly, sometimes the word unjustly is misinterpreted. So they say that whatever we are, the terrorist people and extremists, radical, they say whatever they are doing, that is just out of revenge. They say the wrong which is being done to us, so we are doing the same out of revenge. So that is totally a wrong interpretation, a misguiding concept. According to all classical exegesis, tafasir of the Quran, without a single exception, I am talking of the classical Islamic literature which prevails on 12 to 13 centuries, without a single exception. Every expert and specialist of Quranic exegesis and every imam of tafsir has categorically declared, and it has been unanimously interpreted, that by unjustly it means that except as a punishment for murder, then there is a capital punishment, or a punishment prescribed for spreading disorder, act of brutality, act of violence, act of killing of mankind, act of terrorism, then punishment is the capital punishment. Except this capital punishment given in a due course of law. If anybody takes the arm on his own and kills any person, the word person has been used, man qatala nafsan. So it has totally made it very clear explicitly that this verse is not related to Muslims. And it has been mentioned categorically by all tafasir, the exegetical books written on Quran. So any person is killed. So he says, it is as the murderer, the killer, he has killed all of humanity. So now on this particular thing, this act of killing can be categorized into two kinds. A person kills someone considering it as an unlawful act, illicit act. He knows this is haram, but he is doing out of his wrong temper or whatever he considers. Second aspect, as I already mentioned, he considered this killing halal, rather an obligatory act, an obligation on him, and he thinks this is lawful for him to kill. So by considering that act of killing lawful, by considering this act of killing lawful, this faith, this ideology, this thought and set of mind makes this act kufr. So that's why in my edict, one major question which was always asked by many Muslim scholars who have been condemning the act of terrorism, but they never went up to this extent to declare the criminals, terrorists, committing an act of kufr and going out of the ambit of Islam. They said, why it is kufr and not haram? Then I differentiated the thing. Haram is if he considers this an act of haram according to the commandment of Almighty Allah. He believes in the commandment of Almighty Allah, and instead of that fact he kills somebody unlawfully, unjustly. This is a forbidden act, then he would be punishable for the whatever is recommended for him. And if he consider it lawful, it means he is rebutting the commandment of Almighty Allah through his faith. Where Almighty Allah has said, Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin, this is totally forbidden. Whatever is totally forbidden, he is declaring it lawful. So it means he is rebutting the commandment of Almighty Allah, and he is making lawful what is declared by Almighty God unlawful. He is making halal what has been declared haram. So the Aimma of fiqh and Aimma of tafsir and Aimma of aqidah, the theology, they have unanimously decreed that if he considers this kind of view, then his act becomes kufr. Now coming to the terrorists, they are not killing the mankind, whether in Pakistan or other Muslim countries, or in Western world, in America or in US, in Britain or in European countries. They are killing the mankind through suicide bombing, through their criminal activities, through their terroristic activities, and they consider their act not only halal, they consider as if it is fard, obligation on them. It is mandatory on them. And this will lead us to Jannah, to paradise. And we will be unable to get 70 or more than that, the virgins, and this leads us to paradise. So this is totally to make a mockery of the commandment of God and totally rejecting the commandment of Quran. So it combines two acts. One act of faith, other act of his own killing, practice, action. So he killed, it was haram. And he considered this killing is lawful or obligatory, it became kufr. So after explaining the whole thing, no need of giving many references, I just quote Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. He is a great Imam of Ahlus Sunnah and Aqidah. There were two Imams, the founder of Islamic Ahlus Sunnah theology in 1st, 3rd centuries. Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, he came 10 to 20 years later afterwards. And Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, he was before him. So he declared all these details in his books. Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, Ta'wil Ahl Sunnah, is a tafsir written on the Holy Quran, but this is Ta'wilat Ahl Sunnah, volume 3, page 501. So he has categorically explained this thing there. He said, Man istahalla qatla nafsin harramallahu qatlaha bighayri haqqin فكأنما استحل قتل الناس جميعا لأنه يكفر باستهلاله قتل نفس محرم قتلها. So this was the basic theme which I explained through various evidences in my fatwa. The second important thing is that killing of a non-Muslim, this right has never been given to any person, even in a revenge. So if somebody kills somebody's father, so he has not a legal right according to Islam to take up the arms and kill the murderer's father. So this is against the Islamic discipline, against the law all over the world, and same is the position of Islam and Islamic law. He has to go to the court of law, a regular procedure. So Holy Prophet declared, Man qatala mu'ahadan fi ghayri kunhihi harramallahu alayhi al-jannah. I will explain who is mu'ahad when I will come to Darul Islam and Darul Harb and Darul Ahad. But the basic thing, any person who unjustly kills a non-Muslim, whose life is equally guaranteed as the life of a Muslim, with whom there was a treaty of peace, he was not lawfully allowed to kill him. So Holy Prophet said, he will make paradise, Allah will make paradise haram, forbidden for him for whole life. So this hadith is narrated in Sahih Bukhari and Nasai and Muslim, Kitab al-Qasama and many other books. And at another occasion, Abdullah bin Umar relates from Holy Prophet, Man qatala mu'ahadan lam yarih rahiyat al-jannah. Anyone who kills a non-Muslim citizen, he will never smell the fragrance of Jannah, smell the fragrance of paradise. Again, this hadith is narrated by Imam Bukhari in As-Sahih, under the chapter of, it is the chapter, sin of someone who kills a non-Muslim citizen. So there are dozens, rather 20s of ahadith on this particular subject, which I have mentioned in one of my books on human rights. There are chapters, and I have written other books on the rights of the non-Muslim citizens, and there I have mentioned in detail, and I have quoted some of those hadiths in my edict, my fatwa too. So when it is stated that he will never smell the paradise, the fragrance of paradise, it means eternity. And eternity is always mentioned in Islam. This book I have mentioned all my references in ahadith on this. Just for the disbelievers, not for the persons who are just committing forbidden acts. So there are Quranic verses, there are texts of prophetic traditions, unanimously agreed upon in Bukhari, Muslim, and many books of hadith. There are categorical chapters in the books of hadith which declare clearly, explicitly or implicitly, different both categories, where these kind of killers or terrorist criminals, they become out of the ambit of Islam. And the punishment for them is the same as he has killed any Muslim. Again narrated by Abdul Rahman, he says, Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and Imam Shafi has quoted this in Al-Musnad, and Imam Abu Nu'aym in Musnad Abu Hanifa, and Shaybani in Mabsut, and Bayhaqi in Sunan al-Kubra, and many other books of hadith and fiqh, that one person was a man from the Muslims who killed a man from the people of the book. He killed some Jew in Medina. The case was presented to the Prophet, and he said, I am most responsible of all for fulfilling the rights of those under his care. So all non-Muslim citizens are under my care and guarantee. I am the most responsible for their life, wealth and property and honor. Then he ordered the capital punishment for the Muslim who had killed a non-Muslim. This was a practice. If any Muslim killed a non-Muslim in Holy Prophet's time and in the time of Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman and Ali, all the guided four caliphs, this was a unanimous law of Islam enforced in the caliphate. The capital punishment was awarded to the Muslim killer if he killed a non-Muslim. So always this was declared equal for everyone. And in this particular point, at the end, I will like to quote a very famous statement of Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which he issued in his last sermon of Hajjatul Wida. It is also quoted in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. He said, Inna dima'akum wa amwalakum wa a'radakum alaykum haramun ka hurmati yawmikum haza, ka hurmati shahrikum haza, ka hurmati baladikum haza, ila yawmi tulquna rabba. He said, O people, he didn't address the Muslims. He said, O people, like the Quran addresses, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind, O people, indeed your blood, your property, your honor, everything is inviolable, like the inviolability of this day of Hajj, like the inviolability of this month of Hijjah, like the inviolability of this holy city of Makkah. So nobody can take a life of any person, whether Muslim or non-Muslim. Nobody can infringe the right of their honor, property and things. So that's why Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to enter into the treaties with Christians and Jewish tribes and non-Muslim tribes, and he always used to give the guarantee of these things. There are many texts of treaties which was done by Holy Prophet ﷺ and continued and ratified by the Orthodox caliphs, the guided caliphs. But I will just quote a few words from one, the treaty which he did with the people of Najran, the Christian tribes of Najran. He said, I'm quoting the translation, Arabic is there, the text in my book. So it has been cited by Imam Abu Yusuf in Kitab al-Kharaj. Again, Abu Ubaid Qasim bin Salam in Kitab al-Amwal. Then Sa'd, Ibn Sa'd in Tabaqat. And Ibn Zanjawai in Kitab al-Amwal. And Balazri in Futuh al-Buldan. Holy Prophet said, indeed, Najran, and this was a city of the Christians, and her allies, all their allies, are under the protection of God and guarantee of the messenger of God. They are to be protected, whether present or absent. They are to be protected in their wealth, lives, lands, religion. This includes those who are present and those who are absent, and their families, their goods, and everything in their possession, be it plentiful or scarce. So these were basic teachings of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Can you put this? Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And teachings of Quran. Now, another important thing, why this act of terrorism has no place, absolutely no place in Islam. And there is no exception for them. Whatever. I will come to explain this aspect when I utter a few words on the concept of jihad. They are considering it jihad is absolutely an act of ignorance, illiteracy. They don't know what jihad is and what is not. Jihad is never an act of criminality, a brutality. Jihad is never an act of violence. Even during qital, the lawful warfare, when a just and lawful warfare is going on, during warfare and in the battlefield, there were certain prohibitions which were given by Islam and Holy Prophet of Islam. And they were, for example, the killing of women during lawful warfare was declared to be forbidden. Holy Prophet ﷺ declared, he said, Naha Rasulullah an qatl nisa'i was-sibyan. He said that the killing of women and children have been forbidden forever. No exception to that. It is quoted in Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Muttafaq alayh, and many other books of hadith. Again, moreover, Holy Prophet ﷺ declared unlawfulness of killing elderly non-Muslim people. Now I am talking during the warfare, when the battle is going on practically, in a battlefield, you are not allowed, when a Muslim country or any other country who is aboard of war, a proper warfare is going on, and military operations are going on. So the old citizens are not allowed to kill. They are forbidden. Holy Prophet said, La taqtulu shaykhan faniyan. Wala tiflan. Children are not allowed. Wala saghiran, wala imratan. Neither the women nor the children. This is a complete, absolute prohibition for that lawful war. All these hadiths are available in Sahih Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Nasai, and Sunan, Ibn Majah, Sunan al-Kubra. Every book of hadith quotes these chapters. Furthermore, Holy Prophet ﷺ stated that, again, killing of the religious leaders of non-Muslim, their priest, is also forbidden. Holy Prophet declared, La taqduru, wala taghullu, wala tumathilu, wala taqtulu bildana, wala ashab as-sawami'. It is again related in Imam Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal and many other books of hadith. Holy Prophet said that break no promise, steal not from the spoils of war, and do not mutilate the bodies of your enemies, or not slay children and not their monks and priests. So their killing is also prohibited. In the same way, the killing of diplomats was also prohibited even during warfare. I'm just summarizing the thing, instead of giving references for everything. This book contains all references. Holy Prophet declared the killing of diplomats and envoys and ambassadors. He said this is forbidden. Killing of farmers is forbidden. During warfare, killing of merchants and business community, because they provide this, they protect the economy of a country, the livelihood of the country. They provide the economic prosperity to that society. So the merchants and the business people, they are not allowed to be killed. Holy Prophet said, "Ittaqullah fil fallahin wala taqtuluhum." Fear God regarding the farmers and growers, agriculturists, and do not kill them. And all these hadiths have been unanimously interpreted by the Aimma of Ilm, Aimma of Fiqh, the Islamic theology, Islamic jurisprudence, Islamic law, exegetical science of Quran. Every group of Islamic sciences, the scholars, they have been unanimous. When I would feel no hesitation in saying that last 1400 years of Islamic literature, whatever these things are quoting, every single scholar belonging to any school of law agrees to this point, and there is no dispute on the classical sciences of Islam. In the same way, it was declared, "Inna ashab an-nabiyya lam yaqtuluhum hina fatahul bilad." This was the unanimous practice of the companions of the Holy Prophet. When they conquered the various lands, they did not kill the farmers and growers and the merchants and the priests and the monks and women and children. They were never killed. This was a practice which was always continued. In the same way, the final thing in this respect, after mentioning specific categories, then there is a very comprehensive category, and that is a total unlawfulness of killing any non-combatant non-Muslim. Any Muslim, civil population, who is not directly fighting with you one-to-one in your battlefield, who is not a combatant. So any non-combatant civilian is not allowed to kill in any case. What to talk of killing the Muslims in Pakistan or Afghanistan or other countries or in Arab countries, or what to talk of killing non-Muslims in US or in Britain or in the European countries. Whole of this phenomena, of this mindset, this thought, these ideas, this theology, this ideology, this philosophy behind this mindset is totally against Quran and Sunnah of the Holy Prophet, and totally against the teachings of Islam, and totally against the unanimous classical interpretations of Islam throughout 1400 years. Non-combatants were never allowed to be killed. Holy Prophet ﷺ used to give a categorical instruction that don't attack the people even if they are in the war, regular warfare during night, when the civilian population is sleeping, their children are sleeping, they have sick people, they are sleeping. Just wait till morning, declare that there's going to be a warfare in defense even. We will come to the kinds of the warfare afterwards. So even if you are fighting a defensive war against aggression, war against oppression, where we declare that this war was just war, a lawful war, according to the UNO resolutions, there is no difference as far as I have studied throughout my life as a humble student of Islamic law. I have not found a single minor difference on interpretation of the concept of warfare given by Islam and given by the UNO resolutions, Charter and Security Council resolutions. The only difference is of the terminology. When we go to the Islam, it is used the Arabic terminology of jihad, one aspect of jihad, and qital. When you come here, we say warfare or war. But the same concept of just warfare, with the fulfillment of specific conditions, we will come to that point later on. So the same thing was done. And again, the prisoners of war are not allowed to be killed. And a person who runs away, he is not allowed to be killed. And a very famous practice and conduct of Holy Prophet ﷺ regarding establishing the peace and forgiving the enemies is that it is quoted in, again, Sahih Muslim, in the chapter of the conquest of Makkah. When Holy Prophet entered the Makkah, he said, "Man dakhala dar Abi Sufyan fa huwa aminun. Wa man alqa as-salah fa huwa aminun. Wa man aghlaqa babahu fa huwa aminun." Whoever enters Abu Sufyan's house, he was the leader of the Meccans, non-believers, disbelievers. He was their leader. He said, since they surrendered, the Mecca was conquered. He said, any person who enters his house, he would be safe. Whoever lays down his weapons, disarms himself, he would be safe. Whoever shuts his door and gives a message of peace to the Muslim army, he would be safe. Without any written agreement. Just we need a message that he wants peace. And he is no more fighting or attacking on us, our people. That's it. The peace would be guaranteed to him. So this is what Islam says and what Prophet of Islam has declared. Now, a very significant thing which was asked by respected professor me to throw some light on it, that I declared in my edict that these terrorists of today, they are this thought, this theology and their action, this is a continuity of Kharijites. So this is a Kharijite ideology. It has nothing to do with Islamic ideology. So who are the Kharijites? In Arabic we say Khawarij, Kharijites. There was a people, a group of people who appeared in the days of Sayyidina Ali, the fourth guided caliph, and they turned against him. They were the first people, in fact, who were involved in killing of the third caliph, Sayyidina Uthman. Then they joined the army of Sayyidina Ali, and then they left him, they turned against him, they took up the arms, and the first group armed people who raised the Islamic slogan, La hukma illa lillah. We want Islamic order on this earth. So this was their slogan, and same is the slogan of the today's so-called Islamists or so-called terrorists. They say we don't want democracy. This everything is kufr. We don't want this and that. The rulers are, Muslim rulers are even kafir. We want rule of law. This was the first slogan raised by the Kharijites when they left the army of Sayyidina Ali. La hukma illa lillah. We want the rule of law on the land. And they declared Sayyidina Ali as kafir, the fourth guided caliph. And the companions of Prophet were declared by Kharijites as disbelievers. And number three, they declared a war against them. Killing them is not only lawful, it is obligatory on us. The same theology, philosophy, ideology, mentality is continuing. Let me quote a few words of the famous hadith. I have written a full book on the subject, Al-Intibah fil Khawarij wal Harura. I have compiled all relevant ahadith, about 100 ahadith, from Siyasitta and other books on the subject of Kharijites and their signs. Separate book is available. Holy Prophet said, and it is related in Sahih Bukhari by Imam Bukhari and Muslim and Abu Dawud and Tirmizi, so but Jama'ah of Ashab Sitta. Holy Prophet said, يَخْرُجُ فِي هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ. It is related by Abu Sa'id Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala, a famous companion, and he says, then Abu Sa'id Khudri interprets the word يَخْرُجُ فِي هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ, that there shall appear a folk in this ummah. Abu Sa'id Khudri said that Holy Prophet did not say وَلَمْ يَقُلْ مِنْهَا. He didn't say that amongst my ummah. Here's a very juristic wisdom being explained by Abu Sa'id Khudri. He said, Holy Prophet didn't say that they would be from my ummah. He said, this group will appear in my ummah. He said, it means that Holy Prophet gave us a message that they will announce or declare or proclaim to be in my ummah, but they won't be in my ummah. This is the interpretation by Abu Sa'id Khudri of the words of Holy Prophet. قَوْمٌ تَحْكِرُونَ صَلَاتَكُمْ مَعَ صَلَاتِهِمْ يَقْرَؤُونَ الْقُرْآنَ لَا يُجَاوِزُ حَنَاجِرَهُم وَحُلُوقَهُم يَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الدِّينِ مُرُوقَ السَّهْمِ مِنَ الرَّمِيَّةِ. There shall appear a folk in this ummah. And he did not say from it. Then he said, they will read Quran. He talks, Holy Prophet explained their extreme religiosity. They would be extremely religious in their slogans, in their talk, in their speeches, in their practice, up in their appearance, their bulky beards and everything, having turbans and all these things. This Holy Prophet has mentioned in Hadith. I will quote the signs from Hadith just briefly. Said, and they will read prayers. And he said to companions, even you will belittle your prayers in comparison to theirs. They will fast and they will be reciting Holy Quran, and you will belittle your religious practices in comparison to theirs. But he said that the Quran and Islam shall not pass through their throats, and they shall pass away through the religion just as an arrow passes through a hunted game. They will go out of the ambit of Islam. So I have not said anything on my own. Whatever I have declared, I have just compiled the verses and text of Holy Quran and the text of Holy Prophets and interpretations given by the jurists and classical Islamic authorities in the last 1400 years. But I have compiled them in a way which was not being done, which was required to be done a decade or 2 decades before. So Holy Prophet gave particular signs These are very interesting. The first of them, the sign is that Holy Prophet said they will raise very popular and appealing Islamic slogans, which will be appealing to a common youth, a common Muslims. And no need to now comment on that. You can just keep on applying whatever Prophet's statements are, and you can keep on applying on the present day terrorists. I don't see a very, very bit of difference between the Kharijites of that time and the Kharijites of today. Holy Prophet said, they will seem true and appealing their slogans to a common man. يَقُولُونَ مِنْ خَيْرِ قَوْلِ الْبَرِيَّةِ. Their words would be the best of the Islamic people, just to mislead the people. And Sayyidina Ali interpreted, their words are right, but their intentions are wrong. They use these words and slogans just to mislead the people. Again comes in Sahih Muslim and Bukhari. Again, second sign which Holy Prophet ﷺ has given, there are dozens of hadiths just on this particular point. I am just quoting one in order to elaborate the concept. Again, Holy Prophet said, the second important thing, I have already said that they would be extremely religious. And Holy Prophet ﷺ has given all details of them. They will be having very big shaven head and bulky beard, and they will be raising the trousers up to their half legs, and they will be praying, they will be reciting, they will be giving their speeches, extremely practicing with religion and very hard in there, and these kind of all their appearance, their things has been mentioned by Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that people may easily be misled when they see them. Even Abdullah ibn Abbas and many companions, when Sayyidina Ali, an Islamic army was fighting against the Kharijite terrorists, when they appeared first time in Islamic history, Kharijite terrorists, when they were fighting, Abdullah ibn Abbas was sent with some message to them. So when he saw them praying and fasting and reciting the Quran with the beard and doing all these things, so he was shaken. He came back and said that I couldn't consider these kind of men, are we going to fight with them? Then Sayyidina Ali said, Wallah, by God, I heard these words from Holy Prophet. And he said, they should be terminated like Ad and Samud. And the person who eliminates them, these terrorists, and terminates them, he would be rewarded in the day of judgment. Then he said, we became brave and we started fighting them. And the third important thing which Holy Prophet has mentioned is that they will brainwash young people. The youth would be brainwashed by them. The Kharijites will be brainwashed youth, young people. And you know, most of the age group, teenagers and 20s ages, mostly the youth, they have been brainwashed. Every single day, any terrorist or would-be terrorist who is caught, he is always brainwashed youth. And he has parroted specific verses of Quran with wrong interpretations, and parroted specific traditions of the Hadith and Sunnah with wrong interpretations. He is totally brainwashed, and he claims to be a mujahid. He is serving Islam, killing by whole of humanity. So Holy Prophet said, سَيَخْرُجُ قَوْمٌ فِي آخِرِ الزَّمَانِ. And this will happen in the end of the time, in the last century, and quite long time later. He said, أَحْدَاثُ الْأَسْنَانِ صُفَحَاءُ الْأَحْلَامِ. There shall appear a folk young in age and foolish, immature mentally, and they would be young in age. They would be brainwashed for this purpose. This is a categorical statement of Holy Prophet. That's why I connect them, that these are the continuity of the Kharijite theology. Then next thing Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, again this is in Bukhari, Muslim, muttafaq alayh. This hadith cannot be disputed, cannot be rejected. Again Holy Prophet said they would appear from the east. They would appear from the east. يَخْرُجُ نَاسٌ مِنْ قِبْلِ الْمَشْرِقِ. Again it comes in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, muttafaq alayh. If people shall appear from the east, then remaining signs which I have already mentioned, Holy Prophet quoted those kind of signs. And then finally he said they will pass through the religion of Islam just as an arrow passes through a hunted game. And they will never return until an arrow returns to its bowstring. It means if you want to correct them, those who are already brainwashed, those who have taken the arms, those who have become the suicide bombers and the terrorists, they will never come back. You have to fight them. And those who are would-be suicide bombers or would-be terrorists, they are accessible to them. You have to work on them to change their mindset, their theology, their ideology, the work which we are trying to do, our humble efforts. Again, Holy Prophet said, don't consider that these Kharijites would appear just in the days of Sayyidina Ali, the first century of Islam or first 2 centuries of Islam. No. He said they will keep on continuing coming up again and again in all decades, all centuries, till the Antichrists appear in this world. So Holy Prophet said this is the everlasting continuity of Kharijite terrorists. They will keep on emerging again and again. Every century, every time. In one hadith, Holy Prophet said, La yazaluna yakhrujuna hatta yakhruju akhiruhum ma'al masih ad-dajjal. Iza laqitumuhum faqtuluhum. Holy Prophet said that they will keep on emerging, coming out. They shall continue to appear until the last of them appears with the Antichrist, Dajjal. So you should kill them, terminate them when you are in front of them, or you are in a battle. Don't rely on them. They can dodge you. When you are encountering them, they are the most evil of the creation. And in one hadith, this hadith is also reported by Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal in Musnad. Another hadith, he says that kullama kharaja minhum qarnun qutiya, kullama kharaja minha qarnun qutiya, hatta addaha ziyadatan ala asharat marrat. He said they will emerge again and again they will be terminated by the governments of those times. Again they will emerge, come up, they will be terminated. They will emerge again, then they will be terminated. Holy Prophet mentioned their emergence in the history more than 10 times. And in other hadith related by Ibn Majah, in his Sunan, the first chapter of introduction section, he said, Aksara min ishrina marra. Their very big appearance in the Ummah history would be more than 20 times. More than 20 times. When he says more than 20 times, it means that in every century at different places, time point, they will keep on emerging with same ideology, with same continuity of faith. And Holy Prophet ﷺ ordered his Ummah to fight the war against their terror, to fight a continuing war against the Kharijite terrorism. I have mentioned 36 signs of Kharijite terrorists, 36 signs. According to the hadith of Holy Prophet ﷺ in my book, I mentioned some of them for you. Now, why their act is terrorism and it has nothing to do with jihad? Their activities does not fulfill a single requirement of a jihad. And it has no link with the Islamic concept of jihad. The reason is, again, the concept of jihad is one of the most misunderstood concepts. I won't go into the details. I have delivered certain lectures on the meanings of jihad, on the kinds of jihad, and these concepts are available in many of the books. You can go through them, you can read them. I will try to concentrate on some specific points which would be more beneficial for most of the audience. So, the word jihad has been used in 35 verses in Holy Quran. 31 verses out of 35 have no reference of qital, of fighting or warfare in the Holy Quran. 31 verses out of 35, they are totally free of reference of fighting or a just warfare. Even I am talking of just warfare. Even the word jihad has not been revealed at 31 places in Holy Quran, not in connection of a lawful warfare, no fighting. Neither in the text of the verse, nor in its context. No reference in the text, and no reference in the context of that verse, before or after. 31 verses out of 35. One more thing. Warfare is not known as jihad, technically speaking. There are 5 kinds. Jihad bin nafs, for self-purification. Jihad means struggle, exertion, putting your full efforts for some good cause. It is jihad bin nafs, self-purification. Then jihad bil ilm, you are struggling for spreading of knowledge. This institute is engaged in jihad, spreading knowledge, creating harmony, interfaith harmony and dialogue, and bringing awareness to the communities. This is jihad of knowledge. There are hadiths. I have a full book on this subject. Every kind of jihad, I have 5 books on those, on every single kind of jihad. but instead of mentioning references, I will just summarize this. The third is jihad bil amal, struggling for social reforms. All democratic efforts for social reforms, fighting against corruption, fighting against social evils, all these. As you fight against your lower self, the evils of the lower self, your arrogance, your greed, your lust, your all bad propensities and tendencies. In the same way, wrong social tendencies of the society, which make the society corrupt, fighting against them in a peaceful way is jihad bil amal. Jihad bil nafs, jihad bil ilm, for knowledge, jihad bil amal, with your practical struggle for the social reforms. Fourth is jihad bil mal. It is act of charity, spending your money for alleviation of poverty, for resolving the economic deadlock of the poor, for helping the people. So this is jihad. And fifth is jihad bil qital. It is known as qital, the lawful war in your defense. There is a defensive war. Then again there are the objectives, 5 objectives, but none of them is offensive. All are defensive, just, lawful, and for good cause. This is the fifth one. Qital is used for warfare. And I mean just warfare. If it is not just, if it is not within the proper framework of the objectives, if it is not fulfilling the requirements and basic conditions of a jihad, then this is a criminal act of killing of mankind. This is terrorism. So there is a clear-cut differentiation between the act of terrorism and the act of jihad. The act of jihad is the concept of lawful war as it has been approved by the UNO Charter. The same is in Quran and Hadith. Now, second important point, I have gone through the whole of Quran, Alhamdu wan Nas. I have not found a single verse in Holy Quran, single verse, which contains the word jihad and qital together in a single verse. The whole of Quran is free of this combination. The qital, the word qital and jihad both are never mentioned in Holy Quran in one verse. To avoid misunderstanding and confusion, people may not take necessarily the jihad as qital. Qital means lawful warfare. There are only 4 verses which mention the reference of lawful warfare and lawful fighting or qital with the word jihad, but not in the same verse, just in the context. And all these 4 verses has been revealed in only one surah, At-Tawbah. Verses are 4, but if you count the places, there are only 2. Only 2 places where the word jihad is revealed in a specific verse, and there is reference of lawful fighting before that verse or after that verse. So total 4 verses in number, but 2 places, and in only one surah, not in the whole of Quran. So the word jihad is used absolutely free of the concept of qital, except those 4. And there is defensive warfare. These were the 3 basic points. Another significant point is that everybody knows that qital, I mean lawful warfare, defensive war, to take up the arms, even your armed resistance against aggression and oppression and persecution, against armed resistance or a defensive war. In 13 years of Meccan period, the companions were totally forbidden to take up the arms even against any kind of oppression, cruelty, persecution or aggression. They were just commanded for patience, 13 years. When Holy Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, the first verse, it was revealed, it was in Surah Al-Hajj 22, verse number 39. أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. These are the places of Quran which absolutely clarifies the concept of jihad and qital. It said, permission is granted to take up the arms, to fight those who have already enforced war on you. Permission is granted to take up the arms, to resist with arms and fight against aggression or oppression which has already been committed on you. So this resistance against oppression, permission was granted in the 14th year of the proclamation of prophethood. This verse of Surah Hajj. Second verse, for proper defensive war. That was revealed in 7th year of Hijrah. It means 20 years had already passed. The proclamation of the prophethood. 13 years of Meccan period and 7 years of Medinan period. It was after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was breached. That was a treaty between the Mecca and Medina, Holy Prophet and the Meccans. A treaty of peace. That was a truce for 10 years. It was a no-war pact for 10 years. There would be no war. And there would be no assistance and help for their allies of each other. For 10 years. But the Meccans broke. They breached this treaty of peace. This treaty of Hudaybiyah took place in 6th year of Hijrah. And on 7th year, this verse was revealed. Defensive war. 20 years after proclamation of Holy Prophet's prophethood. And the word was Qatilu fi sabilillah allazina yuqatilunakum wala ta'tadu. Now you can fight those who have already started fight against you. Categorical verses. This is not my interpretation. This is the text of Quran. Qatilu allazina yuqatilunakum. Now you are allowed. You can fight those who are already fighting against you, those who were imposed war against you. This was absolutely, without any confusion, categorical concept of defensive war. And this is permissible in every country, in every nation, in every time. Right, starting from very old periods of Aristotle to today, even knows time. So this was revealed. And only 3 years later, then the kinds of war they were given, these wars were always just defensive and nothing else. So the very important thing which we have to concentrate on is that when qital was prohibited, even defensive warfare and taking up of arms to stop the aggression against you, that was prohibited. In Meccan period, 5 verses of jihad were revealed. 5 verses of jihad were revealed in Mecca, when the companions were not allowed even to take up the arms for their individual self-defense. In those days, the commandment of jihad was there. So this fact makes everything clear that commandment of jihad was in Meccan period in practice, when taking up arms for your self-defense was forbidden even. So those 5 verses which were revealed, they were from Surah Al-Furqan 52, Ankabut 6, Ankabut 8, Ankabut 69 and Luqman 15. These were 5 verses which were revealed in Mecca when Holy Prophet ﷺ and Quran and Sunnah, they totally had already banned to take up the arms for your self-defense. And when you take up the arms for your self-defense, then there are the conditions, specific conditions. And you can't take up the arms, you can't fight the lawful concept of jihad. There are certain conditions which you are supposed to fulfill. If you don't fulfill those prerequisites and conditions, then jihad is not jihad. Jihad means qital, the warfare. Lawful warfare, it converts into act of terrorism. Number 1, not a single individual or a group of individuals or an organization is allowed to take up the arms in any case. This is the first condition. There is a unanimity of opinion. I have made a full chapter on this subject, and Holy Prophet has declared it categorically in Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Sunan, Bayhaqi, every book of hadith contains the chapter, that only this is a privilege or right of the state to declare a warfare. Just or unjust, this is a separate question now. But it would be according to Islam if it is for just cause, for your self-defense. So this is the privilege and right of the state, of the governments. This is a matter between state to state and government to government. Not a single individual is allowed to do that. First condition. Number 2, there is no warfare or act of killing against non-combatants. Absolutely no. Just against combatants. So all suicide bombings being committed in any part of the world becomes totally haram and against the commandments of Quran and Sunnah. Suicide is also haram. So it combines two kinds of acts of haram. It is haram, killing your own self. And then it is a killing of mankind too. So two basic conditions. The third, there should be a just cause. And the just cause I have already explained. If we go through the Holy Quran, the specific causes are either one is your self-defense. You can fight only for your self-defense. It comes in Holy Quran. Just to quote Surah Al-Baqarah 190. Self-defense. Number two, fighting against violence, brutality, and terrorism. This is the second objective. And this has been declared, this terrorism and brutality, violence has been declared as fitna. To make peace and harmony, to restore the peace and harmony, and to eliminate the fitna. So this comes in Baqarah 193 and Anfal 39. Second objective of the lawful war. Third, to help the oppressed people. As all these things are permissible in United Nations charters. To help the oppressed people where there is abuse of human rights. As it was done in case of Iraq or particularly in case of Kosovo. When Security Council resolutions from 1199 to 1244 were passed, where the law was passed for collective intervention in order to stop the abuse of human rights. The UNO Security Council, dozens of, after Iraq war in 1990 and then 92, in many occasions. And then this thing prevailed, the sovereignty of light. And before that, sovereignty concept used to prevail on everything. Then human rights became the more forceful concept. So you are allowed to interfere with collectively. That's why the NATO forces interfere with that. And this is being carried on up till today. So in the same way, if there is abuse of human rights, the people are being killed, persecution is going on, oppression is going on, violence and brutality and act is being carried on, to stop them. This is the third objective. And this thing comes in Surah An-Nisa, verse 75. Then again, fourth is, again if there two states were at war, and then there was a truce, treaty of peace, and that other country breached the treaty of peace, and by that breach of peace, the state of war was restored again, and they were planning to attack you. So this is a preemptive war to save yourself in your self-defense. But again, this is not an offensive war. So this one, again, it is quoted in Surah Anfal, verse number 39. And in spite of all these four basic objectives of war, up till Surah Tawbah, and here comes some people mention and quote the verse of sword of Surah At-Tawbah. And some people wrongly consider that the Surah At-Tawbah, the particular verse known as verse of sword, that repealed and abrogated all verses which I have mentioned and quoted before. That is again totally wrong. We have to go to the tafasir. We have to go to the books of history to understand. That verse was again revealed just in connection of breach of peace which was done by the Meccans, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, breach of peace. Because those people, the Meccans, they had a truce for 10 years, total 10 years, and there was a total agreement that neither any country would attack on each other, nor they will help any other their allies. So they supported Banu Bakr. There was a tribe who was the ally of Meccans. They fought against the allies of Medinans. And they not only supported them with swords and everything, Banu Bakr, they attacked on Banu Khaza'ah. Banu Khaza'ah was an allied tribe of Medina. And Banu Bakr was an allied tribe of Mecca. So it was categorically written that they won't be allowed to support in any war against the allies of each other. Allies will also enjoy the same protection and peace. So Meccans supported them with money, with arms, and they participated physically in the war, in attack against Banu Khaza'ah. And this is how the Treaty of Peace of Hudaybiyah was breached. So after this breach of Treaty of Hudaybiyah, that war was, that verse of Surah At-Tawbah, which is known as verse of sword, was revealed. And this was revealed that because after breach of Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Makkah and Medina, again, Makkah restored its position as a state of war. Because it was suspended for 10 years by a treaty. When they broke the treaty, so it means by their act of breach, they restored again the state of war. They were again on the war position as they used to be, because they were always attacking Medina. They attacked in Badr, they attacked in Uhud, they attacked in Hudaybiyah, about 40 to 60 wars which were imposed on Holy Prophet and on Medina. None of them, about 80 wars, where he had to be involved, where he was forced to participate directly or indirectly, none of them was inoffensive. He was always on defensive front, always on defensive front. Because most of the wars were war of trench, it was fought on the borders of Medina when trench was dug. Uhud was fought in the 2 miles away from city of Medina. They were about to enter into Medina, where there was a defensive war. So when they restored the position, the state of war, only then this verse was revealed. So this verse was revealed, it was absolutely no abrogation. There was no abrogation here. This was just mentioning of them, since the treaty of peace is breached, now if they attack on you or they do preparations of attack, now you are allowed to fight them when they fight you. So it was the restoration of the concept of fight by their breach of treaty of peace. So this verse of sword has nothing to do with the abrogation, because establishment of peace, this order continued till the last day of the life of Holy Prophet. And finally, the concept of jihad requires the cause should be just. It should not be waged by an individual or any group, and it should not be fought against non-combatants, and moreover there should be proportionality. La ta'tadu. Everywhere in Quran it is mentioned. You are allowed to fight them who have already imposed war on you, but don't transgress the limits. The conditions, those acts which have been declared to be forbidden on you, don't transgress and don't cross the limits. Meaning thereby, don't demolish their population, don't cut the trees, don't burn the trees, don't demolish the churches, don't kill the women, the priests, the monks, and all those prohibitions which were done. And don't do any kind of act of brutality with the enemy's dead bodies. So this was don't transgress. So your action should be in a proportion according to their act. And it should, so a proper conduct of, Islamic conduct of warfare was given by the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and the same was practiced by the companions. And the last point which I would like to take just maybe 5 minutes, and that is regarding the division of this world. This is again a very wrong pretext which is taken, and it is considered that all Western world or all non-Muslim world, the terrorist and extremist people, they have been giving a wrong ideology. They misuse the terms and misapply the Islamic terms on wrong places. They consider the whole non-Muslim world is Darul Harb. But what to talk of non-Muslim countries? They consider the Muslim countries have already turned into Darul Harb. That's why they are fighting war against Pakistan. And Islam says even there is a corrupt government. I don't mention the names. Even there is a corrupt Muslim government in certain country. Even then you cannot take arms against them. You have means, peaceful means to change the government. My last chapter of Fatwa deals with this topic. What are the peaceful means? Democratic means, constitutional means, peaceful means. Enter into the process, get integrated with the society, to the society, and work peacefully to change the situation, as every civilized society and every country is doing. Nobody is allowed in any case, even they are corrupt. So they say, according to Islam, first of all, let me mention that this categorization of Darul Islam or Darul Harb or some others, I have categorized into 5. Some old jurists used to categorize into 2. Some made into 3. I have categorized into 5. First of all, let us say this is not a textual matter. This division of the world or countries is not mentioned in Quranic text or the text of Holy Prophet's Hadith. Finished. This is an ijtihadi matter, which has been derived by the Islamic jurists, but on the basis of Quran and Sunnah. So there are 5 abodes, cutting short. according to the teachings of Quran, which can be derived juristically. Darul Islam. And Darul Islam means land of peace, abode of peace, and not abode of the laws of Islam. Again, this is a confusion. Imam Abu Hanifa, Shamsul Aimma Sarkhasi, Imam Tahawi, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, Allama Ibn Taymiyyah, Aimma of Fiqh Shafi'i, and Imam Sawi al-Maliki, the al-Fiqh al-Malikiyya, Fiqh al-Shafi'iyya, al-Fiqh al-Hanbaliyya, Fiqh al-Hanafiyya, all four Sunni schools. Even the Jafri schools also. They agreed upon this idea. Majority of the Islamic jurists, majority, either they should consider Sultan or Ahkam, the rule or the laws. They say if a country is being ruled by Muslims, there are three conditions. And the people living there, Muslims or non-Muslims, if they are getting peace and security, and the law of kufr is not the constitution of that land. Kufr of shirk is not the law of the land, not the constitution of that land. Even a single law of Islamic Sharia, only one law is enforced, and all other laws of Islamic Sharia are not enforced. Even then that land is known to be abode of peace, Darul Islam. And they say, the Aimma of Fiqh, they say that the reason why this abode is known as Darul Islam, they say not because of Ainul Islam, they say because of Salam. Not because the laws of Sharia and laws of Islam are enforced. That's why those countries would be known as the abode of Islam. No, they say if any country is guaranteeing peace to the inhabitants, to the civilians, because of peace, those countries are known to be Darul Islam. If the peace is guaranteed, freedom of religion is guaranteed, cultural freedom, religious freedom, life, honor, property, business, all human rights, they are guaranteed, protected. And there is no fear for their lives. So because of this guaranteed peace, and peace is known as Salam. And the word Islam has been originated from the word Salam, Salima, Salama, Silm. That's why it's known as abode of peace. So in the light of all these Aimma and jurists, all Western countries even, you may not mention any country, including US, Britain, or all Western countries, where the Muslims or non-Muslims are not getting guaranteed peace in their lives. The Muslims are allowed to build their mosques. Religion is free. They are allowed to build Islamic center. They are allowed to do Islamic research. They are allowed to do Islamic big gatherings. Just 2 weeks before, I was addressing a conference in London, 50,000 Muslim people, GPU conference. 50,000 people, they were gathered. You are allowed in London. And I no need to mention, and I can challenge, I can mention dozens of countries of Islamic world where you are not allowed to have this kind of gathering. You are not allowed to have 5,000 people gathered together. This much freedom is allowed to you. You go for Hajj, you go for Umrah, you do your charity, your zakah, your Hajj, your Som, everything. You are free to do everything. Then number two, as a citizen, in US, in Britain, in Western world, you get all benefits of citizenship as other religion, people belonging to other faiths and dominions are getting. There is no differentiation between you. So if you are getting all those rights with full freedom and security, which many of those rights are not available in many Islamic countries and Muslim countries. So still, is there any room to say that these countries are Darul Harb, abode of war? I guarantee that all these countries are similar to Darul Islam. And I have no hesitation in saying Darul Islam if it is not misunderstood. If by saying Darul Islam, if it is not misunderstood, so it is like I would say it is similar to Darul Islam because these countries are the countries of peace. This is Darul Islam, abode of peace where the life is secure and religion, everything. Second is Darul Harb. And Darul Harb is only that country which is at war on you. That's it. When two nations are fighting with each other, one to one, that is Darul Harb. And even if two countries are fighting, you can't attack on the civilian population, non-combatants through suicide bombings and terrorism. That is again haram. War is between the armies, not between the millions and millions of the people, civilian. That is totally haram. Holy Prophet is guarantee for them. in Islam. So this is the position of Darul Harb. And number 3 is known as, which he said, Darul Sulh, abode of conciliation. Abode of conciliation means if two countries were fighting, they were at war, or they were going to fight. Before the fight started or during the fight, one country surrendered and they entered into a peace. So before war started, if they finished the war or they finished the warfare on a particular conditions, so that particular conditions, it makes that country Darul Sulh, the country of conciliation. So the laws for the country of conciliation are the same as the laws of Darul Islam. Third category is Darul Ahad, abode of treaty, where there is a permanent, because the sulh is conditional. Conciliation is on certain conditions, and it can be for stipulated period for 5 years, for 10 years, as in case of Hudaybiyah. But Darul Ahad, if you enter in a permanent, everlasting or long time treaty of peace, it is known as Darul Ahad. So if it is a Darul Ahad, so every person belonging to that country is Mu'ahad. Whether he lives there or he lives in the Muslim country, individual can also be a Mu'ahad. So this is Darul Ahad, country, abode of treaty. So the abode of treaty, the people of abode of treaty enjoy the same rights as the people of Darul Islam. And the fifth one, a new term which I am giving, that is Darul Hayad. Darul Hayad. So we have to determine the relationship between two countries. So if there is a basic original relationship of Muharaba, war, answer is no. The basic original relationship between the Muslims or non-Muslims, or the Muslim country or a non-Muslim country, is it sulh, original? Answer is no. Is it ahad, treaty? Answer is no. Is it mukhalafa, hostility? Answer is no. Nothing. Then what is the original relationship? It is neutrality. Neutrality is known as al-muhayyada. Al-muhayyada, Darul Hayad, al-muhayyada. It is neither al-musalama, nor al-musalaha, nor al-musadaqa, nor al-muharaba, nor al-muwafaqa. It is al-muhayyada, neutral. All states, Muslims and non-Muslims, were originally neutral to each other. Then their further relations created the nature of relationship. If they decided to remain like friends, they became Darul Ahad and Darul Sulh. If they decided to fight each other, they became Darul Harb. And if they decided to remain neutral, they became the neutral land, Darul Muhayyada. So this is the condition of whole world. To me, the whole world is now similar to Darul Islam. Whole world is the abode of peace, except if the two countries or nations are fighting each other, that particular area excluded. Or the whole world, Muslim or non-Muslim, East and West, is Darul Ahad, because of UNO. The whole world, all international community and all international nations, they have entered into a treaty of peace, mutual peace, through UNO, by being the member of this international organization. So everybody is bound to the charter of UNO, being a signatory of that charter, member of that charter. So everybody, it is an obligation to maintain the peace, to live and let live other with peace, in good, peaceful, friendly relations. So because of UNO, this is Islamic law, of Quranic law. Because of this ahad, a treaty, international treaty, now every single nation member of the UNO has become the part of Darul Ahad. And the Quran says, if there is Darul Ahad, you can't take life of any person. This is like taking life of a Muslim. So just quoting Darul Harb, I have already mentioned, it becomes only if the other country attacks on you. You can't initiate the war. Not in order to make them Muslims. There is no coercion, absolutely no coercion on the people to make Muslims. Surah Al-Kafirun, full surah, chapter of the Quran, was revealed on the subject of freedom of religion. O non-believers, you are not going to worship my God. Neither you are going to worship my God, nor I am going to worship your God, your idols. Repeating again and again the whole statement. Finally said, Lakum deenukum waliya deen. You are free in your deen, your religion, I am free in my religion. So this is the guarantee of freedom of religion given by Quran and the Prophet of Islam. So Darul Ahad, if somebody attacks on you, it becomes Darul Ahad, Darul Harb. And Darul Ahad, Quran says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ إِلَىٰ قَوْمٍ بَيْنَكُمْ وَبَيْنَهُمْ مِيثَاقٌ. Mithaq. If there is a treaty between you and the other nation, then you can't take arms against them. And against their allies too. Not only against the nation who is in treaty with you, but again not against their allies you can't take. This is Surah An-Nisa, verse 90. And the same thing which I stated, where I derived Al-Muahada, Darul Hayat, this neutral lands, it is again stated in Holy Quran. Quran says the same verse, Nisa 90. فَإِنْ اِتَزَلُوكُمْ, if they remain isolated from you, indifferent from you, فَلَمْ يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ, and they are not ready to fight you, وَأَلْقُوا إِلَيْكُمُ السَّلَامَ, and they want to live peacefully. These are the neutral states, this Quran says. Then فَمَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ عَلَيْهِمْ سَبِيلًا, then Almighty Allah has made no way for you to fight them. So the neutral states, you can't fight them. And all states are possessing much higher status than the neutral by UNO being the Darul Ahad and becoming similar to Darul Islam. Because Darul Islam, according to the overwhelming majority of the jurists, means the lands where the guarantee of peace and guarantee of freedom of religion is granted. So these were few points. I'm sorry, maybe I have taken more time than it was decided, but I wanted to at least briefly explain certain concepts which were necessary to understand the whole thing. Thank you very much. Should I come down? No. Should I stay here?
Eugene Braderman. I was in the U.S. diplomatic service and a one-time historian. I have two different questions.
Thank you.
The first is, how is the concept of defense that you have elucidated that comes from the Quran, how does that explain the movement in the 8th and 9th century across North Africa and into Spain? How was that defensive? That's question number one. The second, what you're doing is wonderful, I think, but the fact is that many religious leaders in the Muslim world do not agree with your concepts of what is just and unjust. Khamenei, apart from our political differences between the US and Iran. But there are many religious leaders who don't agree with you. And how do they justify their positions as you see it?
I would like to address the second question first. If many or some of the religious leaders, they disagree with me, so we agree on disagreement. The basic thing is, anybody can disagree. The question is not agreeing or disagreeing with me. The question is that what I have said, as I already stated, that I haven't said anything out of my own ijtihad. I have elaborated and substantiated my every statement with the text of Quran, with text of the Hadith and Sunnah, and the practice of guided caliphs and authorities, classical Islamic authorities. So it is the matter of agreeing with Islamic authorities or disagreeing with Islamic authorities. This is this aspect. The only problem is that when they mix the political question with the juristic Islamic question, it makes a problem. There can be political issues around the world which can be settled, which should be addressed in a political way. They can disagree the way they are being settled, or they can agree with the way they are settled. This is a different question. But I am concentrating only, either if they disagree with those settlements, or the way how the UNO or the Western powers are dealing with those certain issues, even if that is correct, So in this particular situation, does Islam allow a certain organization or individuals or people to take up the arms and start killing the people, or suicide bombing, or attacking the Twin Towers, or attacking US citizens, or attacking the British citizens or the Western world? Even if we accept all those arguments which they want to say, here a wrong is committed, here wrong is committed, oppression is committed, but are individuals allowed to take revenge in this way against the civilian population? Quran and the Sunnah of Islam, their answer is categorically no. So my concern is only with this. I am not addressing the political solutions. I am not addressing the matters of the other political areas. I am concentrating on clarifying the position of the Sharia, of Islam, Islamic law, and the Prophet of Islamic teachings. So their stance and their viewpoint is totally against Islam. They can say this is our political stand. If they come up with saying that this is our political viewpoint, I want fight with arguments with them. But I would stand up only when they say whatever we are doing, this is jihad. Whatever they are doing, this is Islamic defense. Whatever they are doing, they are fighting for ummah. When they use this slogan, then I am duty bound to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. This is the difference between the two things. As far as many fights and military actions and things which took place in the old ancient histories, whether in Spain or South Africa, those were days of war in the Christian world as well as in the Muslim world. And there was no UN nor international body to settle the disputes with proper peaceful way. And there were different mad situations. So there is long historical discussions and analysis. But the basic theme is that as starting from the very, very old era, even in the Greek time and before that, and even when the pagan Arab society came, the Byzantine time and the Islam was emerged, and after that the Umayyads and Abbasids, on the other the Christendom, the Christian world, whole these centuries were the centuries of settling the issues through war. So we don't need to, because to protect or to safeguard or to justify each and every action has its separate implementation, separate explanations, and separate historical backgrounds and differences. So at the moment we are talking of what are according to the Islamic teachings and what or not. That's why wrongly the word jihad was given a translation of holy war. This is a wrong translation. This is also a legacy of those days. Jihad doesn't mean the word war is not contained in the literal root of the word jihad. So holy war is a wrong concept. It means struggle. So that was legacy of both sides. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, sir. My name is Kami Bhatt and I write for the Pakistani Spectator. My question is that where did Saudi Arabia, United States and Pakistan took the concept of jihad when they taught these Taliban in Pakistani tents that how to fight against Russian? So if for those Taliban it was legal or moral to fight against Russian, why isn't it legal or moral for them to fight against American and fight against Pakistanis, especially given that it's symmetrical war, they do not have those kind of resources. Number two, we Pakistani, American, we are guilty to teach those things, those Taliban bad things, how to kill Russian. So isn't that bad for us to kill them rather than teach them and undone the thing that we did wrongly? Thanks.
Answering the last part of your question, I have already explained in my lecture that Holy Prophet's teaching is that if you are firm that these are terrorists and killers of mankind, so instead of teaching them, just terminate them. They are enemies of humanity. Now coming to the first major part of your question. So I know this fatwa of jihad, when a war was being led in Afghanistan against Russia, was given jointly by America, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. These were three international muftis who gave the fatwa of jihad at that time. For their own reasons, I don't want to enter into those discussions, but still there is a difference. At that time, the Afghans were fighting in their self-defense, for defense of their own land, to liberate their own land, homeland, from Russian occupation. Now, keeping the American, Saudians and Pakistani involvement apart, Afghan, they were fighting for their self-defense or liberation of their land. But now, in Pakistan or in other parts of the Western world, nobody is fighting for the liberation of their land. Here in Pakistan, the bombings are on the mosques, on holy shrines, on twin towers, on train in England, Britain, on various aeroplanes, on civilians. So it has no match with that kind of fight. This is just an act of criminality, an act of terrorism. They were fighting at that time to liberate their own homeland. For liberation, every nation up till now has a right to fight anyone who occupies your land. Nobody would say no to that. The third part of your question is that Pakistanis are guilty for that. Pakistanis are guilty and many other people are guilty too. If this evil was totally eliminated just when it was in its beginning, it was commencing, then it was very easy. Once I told somebody who was very responsible of the affairs of Pakistan in a one-to-one meeting that was proper time to eliminate the terrorism. If you don't eliminate them now, after 5, 7, 10 years, they will reach the stage when your own existence and capital would be in danger. It would be very difficult. So this terrorism and extremism, terrorism does not come into existence in one night. It has a long journey. It starts from non-violent extremism. This is the foundation. And unfortunately, up till today, all nations of the world, without any difference between East and West and Islamic and Western countries, I would say all nations of the world, up till today, are committing the same mistake. They are not concentrating on the foundation. Non-violent extremism is not being addressed up till now. And they're not trying to understand that the violent extremism and radicalism and terrorism emerges from this soil. So non-violent extremists in ideology, in theology, in way of thinking, they are free everywhere. Rather, they are most reliable people in the world. And when it emerges into, converts into radicalism or terrorism, then we start fighting the terrorists. So I think this war of terrorism, we can't succeed in it. We can't succeed unless we start the war of ideas, the war of theology, the war of ideology, by comprehending all basic postulates and basic theories through which they are being misguided. We have to start this war of ideology right from non-extremistic soil. It is still not being taken care of. Thank you.
I'm Ali Chaudhry. I'm professor at Rutgers University. I'm also founder and president of the Center for Understanding Islam, which has been engaged for the last 10 years in educating both non-Muslims and Muslims about the meaning that you're talking about, the true meaning of jihad.
Yes.
My question to you is this.
Yes.
If we still have religious leaders and institutions in Islamic countries, whether it's Pakistan or other places, that are advocating the extremist ideologies and using jihad to justify, or using the meaning of jihad to justify suicide bombings or other activities, what are you as a leader doing to change the mindset of those people who are being trained in these institutions? And what should be the responsibility of the leadership in the countries, including people in the United States or Muslims living in the West, to say, how do we actually counter this extremist ideology so that we can actually turn the tide and have these people truly understand what Islam really teaches? How can you provide the leadership in that regard?
Thank you very much. As far as my humble role is concerned, what I am doing or I can do, it is in front of everybody. I'm traveling all over the world from east to west and discussing the same subject, propagating this message of Islam and peace to the whole world, Muslims and non-Muslims, and condemning the acts of terrorism, substantiating with the authorities of Quran and Sunnah, and trying to change their mindsets. What we can do, we have to differentiate between two groups. One is those who have already been totally brainwashed, and they are already suicide bombers and they are terrorists, they are brainwashed, and now you can't change their mindset, except if Allah wills, God wills. They are few in number. As far as the overall, when we consider the Muslim world, Very, very few, very small minority. Those who are already suicide bombers or attackers. Majority, millions of the Muslims and youngsters and youth, they have not yet become suicide bombers and terrorists, but they are on the same way, same path. So they are accessible to them. Internet, the media, information, the blogs, the discussions and the speeches and the literature and the propagations and messages all over the world, they are reading always, and they are being disturbed out of the political situation, and the extremist people, they exploit the issue of political situations, and in order to make their particular mindset to motivate them to bring on this side. So what we can do, and I am doing, and we should do, we should address particularly those millions of youth in the Muslim world, in the Western world, those who are accessible to radicalism and extremism. They are would-be suicide bombers, or they can be would-be terrorists. We can stop them from becoming this. We can stop them by changing the mindset. How we will do that, and how I am doing. The reason is that there are certain institutions, when you ask, are there certain leaders or religious people or institution doing this? Answer is very briefly, yes. I don't say no. Yes. What they do, not only institution, the media itself is a very big institution. Your internet and the people are being taught, all these ideas are spreading all over the world. So they are parroting Quranic verses with wrong interpretations. قَاتِلُوهُمْ قَاتِلُوا أَئِمَّةَ الْكُفْرِ, without any context, as I explained everything that you have to, and they parroted some hadith of qital and jihad, just the reward. They have been given just concept of martyrdom. Martyrdom. They are martyred. Concept of the virgins, concept of paradise, then economic frustrations. So it is very easy to access their minds, to motivate them, to brainwash them, and to take them for the martyrdom, and to take them for paradise, and to do the jihad. This with misleading is very easy for the young generation. So what we are supposed to do, and we should do, and I think it has not yet been started. The US, Britain, Western government should do that, and Islamic government primarily they should do that. Some institutions are required to be built, where specialized on these particular subject, where the scholars and the students and youngsters and the people should come for specific courses. They can run for 1 month course, 3 month course, 6 months course, 1 year course. More than that depends upon their availability and how much the people want to learn. So that they may understand that all ideology which was inculcated in their mind was totally wrong. They shouldn't try to understand through Quran and Sunnah. Since they are Muslims, they will understand the language of Quran and Sunnah, which is wrongly communicated to them and interpreted to them. You have to give them the right message of Quran. Then these people take them away from classical interpretations. They just take them to the textual wordings. That's it. So they don't go towards the context. They don't read the tafsir books, exegesis. They go to the commentaries of the hadith and the authorities of Islam and hadith, tafsir and fiqh and aqidah. 1400 years, those who have passed on this knowledge from generation to generation up till now, they are totally unaware of these things. So these academies or institutions should be built up where they should be taught the real, all those verses should be taught with exegetical interpretations. Concept of, what is concept of jihad? What is Darul Harb? What is Darul Islam? What are the rights of the non-Muslims? What are the conditions required for the qital, lawful war? What are the conditions which make an act a killing and criminality or terrorism? So what are the relations between the two? Human rights, democracy, peaceful living, interfaith harmony. Minhajul Quran is, I would say, is the only one Islamic organization, worldwide organization in the whole world, which can claim for the last 20 years or 15 years, my organization, when I was there, I am there, or even if I am not there, my organization headquarters, celebrate the Christmas every year. And all Christian leaders, they come every year to Minhajul Quran. And I opened the mosque of Minhajul Quran for them to pray and to worship according to their own Christian religion. And I said, this is the sunnah and conduct of my Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He opened the mosque of Medina for the people of Najran, the Christians, to pray and Habasha to pray according to their own religion. So I opened. So I gave the authorities, just 2 or 3 mullahs. They issued a newspaper statements, just one. This is not a good thing which Professor Qadri has done. But nobody in the whole world had a courage to rebut my act with authority or with evidence or argument. Nobody can say, but this is not the sunnah of Holy Prophet. So I took courage. So we have to take courage. We have to open the doors. So we opened the Muslim Christian Dialogue Forum, MCDF. We made together Muslim Christian peace walks. We have joint gatherings. We do joint, and the Christians last year they celebrated Mawlidun Nabi in the church. My son Hussein gave an address of Mawlidun Nabi in the church. And next year, the Sikh temples, Hindu temples, and the Christian churches, all those invited the Minhajul Quran people for celebration of, because they said, you are celebrating Christmas for the last 20 years, and we are participating. Now in response, they are coming forward. This is how we have to create an atmosphere of interaction, to understand each other. This is the time of peaceful coexistence. This is the sunnah of Holy Prophet. That's why Holy Prophet was not sent to Arabs. He was not raised for Muslims. He was raised for the whole mankind, for the whole universe, when he said, Ya Yuhannas, inni Rasulullah ilaykum jamiyya. Wa ma arsalnaka illa rahmatan lil alamin. He was raised as a mercy for the whole mankind, for believers and non-believers. This is the Islam, is the religion of mercy, religion of passion, religion of compassion, religion of morality, religion of beneficence, religion of benevolence, religion of forgiveness, religion of peace. So these things are needed to be taught. And one last suggestion, I would just leave here in the air. I don't know how it would be taken is, I am dreaming, if some big nations should take a start to build up a global center for religions, one center under one roof, where the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians and other religions, all of those religions should pray, should live in their mosque, temple, synagogue and church under the same roof. And they should sit there in a joint council to give a message of peace to whole mankind together. I want this kind of Bayt Ibrahim, house of Abraham, or house of the global religions together, where all religions leaders should sit together. There should be a global assembly of religious leaders together. They should unite, because not only Quran gives the message of peace, the whole of Bible gives the message of peace. All Testaments give the message of peace. Old or New Testament. The Hindu religion gives the message of peace. Jewish religion gives the message of peace. Sikh religion gives the message of peace. And all other religions and humanities and the secular people, every person belonging to any domination or belonging to secular, civil religion for example, everyone has a message of peace and idea of peace. So it should be discussed, given, and a code should be made. Under one roof, a big global house or assembly should be established for all religions, putting them together. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. I really appreciate your lecture today, especially the talk about Kharijites, because I don't think I'd ever heard that aspect of today's Kharijites before. My question is, you've answered most of it in the previous question. Are the teachings of Minhaj al-Quran really being able to impact the youth of Pakistan, at least? In that, is it being able to counter the jihadi rhetoric that is coming up in their conversations and in some of the madrasas, for example, that we hear here? Also, what is America doing right? And what is America doing wrong with its relationship with Pakistan in helping them fight terrorism? Like I hear when you say just war, there's the drone attacks versus there are people who look like non-combatants, but they are actually combatants. And so you don't know how to fight this war because you don't know who's the official, It's not like the battlefields of Badr and Uhud. So how is it, what is America doing right and what can it do better with its fight against terrorism in Pakistan?
Thank you very much. I won't give my judgment on the political aspect of your question. America is doing right or wrong in relations with Pakistan. That is a separate question. But I would say this much, that capability should be established in every nation fighting terrorism on their own, so that there are no big reactions against the war of terrorism. They should be given, encouraged. And then again depend on the question, how much would be the reliability? That's why there's a big question mark. That's why I want to answer more. Capability should be transferred to them, but at the same time the question comes about the reliability. So I will keep silent on that. This is their matter. White House and Pentagon should discuss and decide the question of reliability and transfer of capability. As far as what Minhajul Quran is doing, you know, this is the first stance in Pakistan, history of Indo-Pak subcontinent. I established Minhajul Quran as an institution, and now, alhamdulillah, this is the only one university which is chartered by the government of Pakistan, which emerged as an Islamic institution, and now is not only Islamic university, it is a full-fledged university having all other disciplines. So what we have done, we have created an interaction between all disciplines. This is again, if you go back in the very old areas, centuries, there was a unity and uniformity in the system of Islamic education. The mufassirs, the specialists of tafsir, specialists of hadith, specialists of fiqh, specialists of aqidah, and specialists of science, of medical science, of mathematics, of cosmology, of anatomy, of botany, of embryology, of cosmology, of metaphysics, or astrophysics, all were coming from the same institution coming out. There was a level, up to this level would be a common education, common syllabus. After that, they used to start the specializations. This was which was being done in Spain in Islamic period. This was done in Cordoba. It was done in Baghdad. It was being done in Damascus, in Nizamiya, in Nishapur, in all old great eras of Islamic history, when there was no segregation of the secular and religious sciences. One problem is this: now at present there is segregation. When I say no segregation, it means up to one level, all of them, the religious madrasas. I have not established a single madrasa in whole of country. Just a madrasa, an isolated study of religion creates problems. It creates narrow-mindedness, isolated study of religion. The boys studying in madrasa, they are never integrated with the society. They are not aware of the social circumstances, political circumstances, sociological developments, ecological developments, political, neighborhood, the regional developments, international. They are aware of nothing except a very old syllabi of the books, morely those syllabi which were compiled even 300 years before, and they are unable to fulfill the needs of today. The syllabi needs to be revised, updated, so that they may fulfill the needs of the present era. And number two, this segregation should be finished. Madrasa should be converted into big Islamic, big schools. Religion should be studied as a discipline. But at the same time, they should study English, they should study sociology, they should study secular sciences, social sciences, medical sciences, engineering, all sciences up to certain level. They should understand everything of this world. After that, then choices always are given, like other schools, the secular schools. The same discipline and format should be adopted in that side too. They can specialize afterward in fiqh, in tafsir, in hadith, in morality, in Sufism, whatever they want to specialize. But at least they should have basic understanding of the knowledge of the world. So this is the second thing. We have established this model. If in Pakistan or anywhere anybody wants to follow, this is a charter university. It can be easily followed. Already a sample is there, working model and working sample. So I think awareness is being created. People are coming toward the same thing. The basic thing is that most in the last thing, the madrasas, one is the narrow-mindedness. Other is again the problem is lack of ability. They are not creating, some sciences are, for example, traditional. Some are rational and intellectual. If the people are becoming a half-baked expert of traditional sciences and have no concern with rational sciences, this is the whole problem, the outcome which are coming from madrasas. No awareness of rational sciences and half-baked specialist of traditional sciences. They need full-fledged ability and full-fledged analysis and full-fledged comprehensive knowledge of traditional sciences, as well as a comprehension of the knowledge of the rational and the modernistic sciences of today. And there should be a beautiful combination and balance between the two. So we need a very big revision to revise the whole education system, religious and secular, they are both. And we need more expenditure and more spending on education. We need people to educate. And the last thing is the poverty, the economic and social factor. The poor families, their children are picked up by the terrorists, they are giving scholarships, and they get money from various parts. And they are picked up because of their poverty, because they get everything free in those madrasas where they are made the narrow-minded people. And education is not available free in those poor countries. So there are maybe 80%, 75% families now, they can't afford education of their children. So they prefer sending their children to those institutions where even they get soap and oil free. Shoes and clothes are free, everything is free. So they have become, there are many other reasons. We have to address all these reasons together in a totality, comprehensiveness. Thank you.
Would you like to come here? Would you like to come here? I have a lot of enough rest. I want to take this occasion. We look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.